Imagine yourself as a Roman senator, walking cautiously through the Suburra, the city's infamous district of vice and pleasure, where the scent of wine, sweat, and incense hangs heavy in the night air. Suddenly your steps falter, your heart pounding, as your eyes fall upon a figure you recognize, one who should never be in such a place. In the shadows of a common brothel, you see a familiar face, painted with cheap makeup, half hidden beneath dim lantern light. For a moment, disbelief paralyzes you. Then the realization strikes like ice in your veins. This is not some nameless prostitute. This is Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, wife of Emperor Claudius, willingly surrendering herself to strangers for the intoxication of anonymity, lowering herself to the level of the city's most degraded souls. Before we delve into these overlooked tales of endurance and pain, if you find yourself drawn to the hidden corners of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I am always amazed that we can explore these ancient narratives together, no matter where we are in the world, united by our curiosity about the past. This was no desperate woman forced into the brothel's filth by hunger or circumstance. This was the highest woman in the empire, descending from the marble halls of the Palatine to the mud and sweat of Rome's backstreets, slipping from her palace chambers at night to compete with common prostitutes, determined to prove that no woman alive could match her in sexual endurance. You think you know the excesses of Rome? You have heard tales of debauchery, of emperors who turned palaces into theaters of sin. But what you are about to discover about Messalina will make the infamy of Caligula look tame, almost innocent by comparison. For Rome's third empress did not merely indulge in corruption. She did not simply abuse her station. She weaponized her own sexuality as a tool of dominance, of humiliation, and of control, turning pleasure into terror and passion into politics. And it was this twisted obsession that would ultimately carve the path to her own horrifying downfall. The story begins in the year 38 CE, when Rome celebrated what appeared to be the perfect imperial wedding. Valeria Messalina, a girl of just 15 years, was married to Emperor Claudius in a ceremony filled with the weight of tradition, symbolism, and divine expectation. To the people of Rome, the union embodied everything the empire claimed to hold sacred: noble bloodlines, fertility to ensure heirs, and the unbroken continuation of Rome's divine destiny. Messalina was, in every sense, the image of what an empress was expected to be: youthful, breathtakingly beautiful, descended from an ancient patrician family, and capable of giving the empire legitimacy through her children. Claudius, 13 years her elder, came to her marriage with a reputation both pitied and mocked. Stricken with physical limitations that modern medicine identifies as cerebral palsy, he had spent much of his life dismissed as weak, awkward, and unfit to rule. Yet now fortune seemed to smile upon him. He had won an empress who radiated beauty, refinement, and nobility. Contemporary chroniclers describe Messalina with words soaked in admiration. Pale, luminous skin, hair that gleamed golden in the Mediterranean sun, and the poised features of old Roman aristocracy. She seemed a living embodiment of Rome's past glories and future hopes. She performed her early duties flawlessly, giving Claudius 2 children, standing beside him at public ceremonies, and appearing at state functions with the composure of a true empress. But Roman society was a structure built on strict, immovable moral codes, especially for women. A woman's place in Rome was dictated by rigid categories. The virtuous wife and mother held the highest honor, while prostitutes and entertainers occupied the lowest rungs of society's ladder. An empress was expected to embody the ideal so completely that not even the whisper of impropriety could be tolerated. A rumor alone was enough to shake the government, to cast doubt on divine favor. In such a world, The contrast between Messalina's public image and her private appetites was not simply scandalous. It was a threat to the stability of the empire itself. Behind the towering columns and polished marble of the Palatine Palace, a darker truth began to take shape. The same young woman who stood serenely during religious processions, who hosted dinners with flawless grace, was quietly planning nocturnal adventures that would leave even the most jaded Roman aristocrats shaken. Men and women who had seen decades of Rome's decadence would soon learn that Messalina was capable of plunging into depths they had never imagined. The change began quietly, almost invisibly, in her first year as empress. Servants whispered of strange behaviors. Guards were dismissed late at night under the excuse of fatigue. Soon after, Messalina would slip out of her chambers clothed not in silks and jewels, but in simple garments designed to mask her identity. At first, her excursions could almost be dismissed as youthful rebellion, the restless acts of a young woman suffocating under the endless ceremonies and formalities of palace life. But quickly her midnight wanderings evolved into something far more deliberate, far more calculated, and infinitely more dangerous. She began to observe the prostitutes of Rome, not as a curious noblewoman, but with the trained eye of someone studying an art, dissecting a craft. She noted their routines, their techniques, the ways they attracted clients, the territories they claimed as their own. This was not idle fascination. This was research. Messalina was conducting a methodical investigation, as if preparing for battle, as if planning a campaign. The first documented descent into this hidden life came during the great festival of Saturnalia in 40 CE. Saturnalia was the season when Rome turned upside down, when the order of things was inverted, masters serving slaves, laws relaxed, morals set aside in the name of revelry. It was a time when the impossible became possible and chaos reigned. Claudius, dutiful as ever, spent the festival engaged in religious rituals. Messalina, however, saw an opportunity. Disguised as a common woman of the streets, she left the palace and ventured into the Subura district, Rome's seething center of vice. What began as curiosity, an urge to glimpse the lives of ordinary Romans, quickly deepened into obsession. The empress was not content to simply watch. She hungered to participate, to test herself, to prove that her beauty, her power, her very body could surpass those who made a livelihood from desire. Whispers later preserved by the historian Tacitus reveal the shocking truth. Messalina, Empress of Rome, approached the keeper of a brothel with an offer. She wished to work, not for pay, not for need, but for the thrill of anonymity. To the proprietor, she appeared as nothing more than a curious aristocratic woman seeking reckless amusement. He accepted, having no idea that the most powerful woman in Rome now stood in his establishment as one of his girls. That night, Messalina unleashed herself. She did not simply imitate the other women. She outpaced them. She received client after client, surpassing even the most experienced of the brothel's workers. Those hardened in the trade, women accustomed to enduring endless demands, were stunned at her appetite. As dawn drew near and the prostitutes retired from exhaustion, Messalina refused to stop. She demanded more partners, more challenges, more tests of her endurance. Finally, the brothel master forced her to leave, for there were no more men to offer her. But in that single night, something had been awakened within her. The Empress of Rome had discovered her true obsession. Within months of this first descent, Messalina developed a system, a cold, deliberate framework for her nocturnal life. She organized a network of trusted servants who smuggled her out of the palace unseen. She commissioned disguises that transformed her completely. She crafted false identities so convincing that she could move among the city's shadows without suspicion. Yet simple prostitution, even under disguise, soon failed to satisfy her hunger. Messalina's drive was not merely to participate but to dominate. Her competitive spirit sought conquest, even in degradation. She began to organize contests, competitions between herself and Rome's most celebrated courtesans. Enormous sums of money were wagered. Her aim was clear: to prove that the Empress of Rome could outlast, outwork, and outshine every professional in the city. And these contests were not conducted in secret. They drew crowds. Members of Rome's elite attended in person, gathering to watch their sovereign's wife abase herself for entertainment. In whispers and gasps, they placed bets, as though witnessing a gladiatorial match, though the arena was one of flesh and shame rather than blood and steel. The most infamous of all occurred in the year 41 CE. Messalina challenged Scylla, the most celebrated prostitute in Rome, renowned across the empire for her skill and stamina. The rules were simple. From the setting of the sun to its rising at dawn, whoever serviced the greater number of men would claim victory and a fortune in gold. The hall was packed with Rome's nobility. Senators, equestrians, and wealthy merchants pressed in, waiting to see which woman would triumph. Scylla, seasoned and calculating, paced herself with care. Years of experience had taught her to conserve her strength, to handle clients efficiently without exhausting herself too soon. Through the long night she endured, and by dawn she had entertained 25 men. Worn but confident, she declared herself victorious. But Messalina was only beginning. Even as Scylla retired, the Empress continued, demanding more men, more challengers, more proof of her supremacy. The night stretched on. By its end, she had surpassed Scylla's total, reportedly servicing over 30 men before finally stopping, not from exhaustion, but because no more men remained to test her. This was no ordinary victory. There were no cheers. The room was filled with horrified silence. Those who had come expecting spectacle realized they were witnessing something unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Rome's empress, the wife of their emperor, had chosen to reduce herself to this level, not through desperation, but through desire. The implications were staggering. This was not a powerless woman forced into degradation by circumstance. This was the most powerful woman in the empire actively seeking humiliation, not as punishment but as pleasure. For Messalina, the thrill did not come despite her imperial status. It came because of it. The sharper the contrast between her public dignity and her private shame, the more intoxicating the satisfaction. And yet, these public contests were only the beginning. They were a prelude, an opening act, to a descent that would soon become darker, more systematic, and far more threatening to the empire itself. The morning after her infamous contest, Messalina returned to the Palatine Hill. She sat beside Claudius, the emperor, attending official ceremonies with the same calm dignity as if nothing had happened. To the public eye, she remained the model of Roman motherhood, wife, and matronly virtue. Yet beneath the silks and jewels, another life had taken root. What had begun as reckless indulgence was now evolving into something colder, something calculated. Messalina realized her desires could serve a higher purpose. Her nocturnal adventures need not remain simple acts of gratification. They could become tools of control. Soon, Rome whispered of something even more astonishing than her contests. The Empress herself had established a brothel. Hidden deep within the Subura district, away from the marbled palaces and senate halls, an entire house of prostitution operated under her command. Here, she no longer came only as a participant. She came as a ruler, Behind beaded curtains, she directed the girls, set the prices, and organized the clientele. Senators, knights, merchants, and officers came, never realizing that the true mistress of the establishment was the emperor's wife. She watched from hidden chambers, noting names, faces, and desires. It was not merely lust that drove her now. It was power. Messalina began to record the secrets of Rome's elite. She learned which men sought forbidden pleasures, which exposed themselves to scandal, which could be controlled by fear of revelation. Every night's work was written into her invisible ledger, a book of corruption more potent than any sword or decree. And soon her ambitions extended further. She dispatched her agents across the city to recruit, to tempt, to trap. Prominent wives were drawn into the brothel under threats or promises, humiliated before strangers, their reputations ruined, their husbands bound in silence. Noblemen themselves were forced into compromising positions. By dawn, Rome's most respectable houses stood vulnerable to her will. The empire's mistress had turned the oldest profession into the sharpest weapon. The brothel was no longer a playground. It was a snare. Those who entered seeking pleasure often left bound by debt, shame, or blackmail. Messalina fed upon their secrets, tightening her grip upon the Senate, the courts, and the army itself. And still the paradox deepened. For amid this cold machinery of control, her personal appetite remained undiminished. She did not merely orchestrate the trade. She continued to join it. Masked and disguised, she took her place upon the couches, not as ruler but as rival, challenging her own courtesans, proving her endurance night after night. Her presence blurred every line between sovereign and servant, between ruler and slave. To the outside world, none of this existed. Claudius remained ignorant, distracted by affairs of state and blinded by devotion to his young wife. He spoke of her as the mother of his children, the ornament of his reign. Meanwhile, in the shadowed streets, the Empress of Rome conducted her true empire, one of lust, humiliation, and whispered threats. But secrecy is fragile, and the higher the stakes, the sharper the fall. Every night Messalina wove her web tighter, drawing more victims, more enemies, more dangers. The city held its breath, for such games could not remain hidden forever. By now, Rome's whispers had grown louder. Messalina's name passed from mouth to mouth in the Subura, in the markets, in the Senate corridors. Too many had seen too much. Too many had suffered at her hands. Still, she pressed forward, convinced of her invincibility. For Messalina's hunger was no longer satisfied by secret contests or shadowed brothels. She had conquered men in private, humiliated rivals in silence. Now she craved the impossible, open possession. She wanted not just lovers, but a new husband, a new throne, a kingdom of her own. At the heart of this ambition stood Gaius Silius. He was Rome's most handsome noble, celebrated in the Forum, adored by women, envied by men. Young, bold, and charismatic, he seemed the very opposite of Claudius. Vigorous where the emperor was hesitant, admired where Claudius was mocked. To Messalina, he was not simply a lover. He was the image of the future she desired. Their affair began in whispers, but soon it blazed like wildfire. Messalina spent her days at Silius's side, ignoring even the thin veil of discretion. His home became her palace, his friends her court. Senators watched in stunned silence as the empress flaunted her infidelity. But none dared move against her, for who could accuse the wife of Caesar without risking their life? Yet Messalina did not stop at passion. She demanded permanence. She wanted Silius not as a secret, but as a husband. And so, in a move so audacious it seemed madness, she staged a wedding. Yes, a wedding. While Claudius still lived, still ruled, still wore the laurel crown, Messalina donned the bridal veil and gave herself publicly to Silius. The rites were performed with full ceremony. Witnesses, musicians, feasts. Rome looked on in disbelief. The empress, wife of the emperor, mother of his children, had married another man as though Caesar himself were already dead. Why? Some believed she thought Claudius weak, easily overthrown. Others whispered that prophecy or superstition drove her, that she feared Claudius's death was near and wished to secure her place beside a younger, stronger ruler. But whatever her reasons, the act shattered the silence. This was no longer lust in shadows. This was treason in daylight. News of the wedding reached Claudius slowly, wrapped in disbelief. At first he dismissed it, certain it must be rumor. Messalina? Is Messalina, the woman he praised in the Senate, the mother of Britannicus and Octavia? Surely Rome had mistaken some prank, some jest. But as messenger after messenger arrived, the truth pressed upon him like iron. The emperor's advisors panicked. For years they had endured her games, her cruelties, her empire of shame. But now she had crossed into open rebellion. They knew Claudius's hesitation, his weakness of will. If he faltered, Messalina and Silius might seize the palace itself. The empire trembled on the edge of civil war. So the council acted. Orders were drafted. The Praetorian Guard was summoned. Silius was seized, stripped of his finery, dragged to execution. His beauty, his boldness, his dream of kingship, all ended beneath the blade. Messalina, however, remained at the Palatine Gardens, unaware of how swiftly her empire was collapsing. When news reached her that Silius was dead and the guard had come for her, she fled in terror. No longer the mistress of brothels or queen of conspiracies, she now appeared only as a desperate woman, pleading for her life. Her last hope was Claudius himself. She begged to see him, to speak with him, to throw herself at his feet. Perhaps his love, his blindness, his old devotion might save her one final time. But her enemies were quicker. Narcissus, the emperor's freedman, feared her tongue more than her armies. If Claudius heard her voice, he might yet forgive. So Narcissus gave the order. In the gardens of Lucullus, surrounded by soldiers, Messalina met her end. Cornered, trembling, she hesitated to strike the dagger into her breast. It was the centurion who delivered the final blow. Rome's empress, once its most feared seductress, fell silent upon the grass. Thus ended the reign of Messalina, not by Senate decree, not by civil war, but by the weight of her own recklessness. Her brothels were shuttered, her ledgers burned, her name cursed in whispers. Yet even in disgrace, her legend endured. For she had shown Rome how desire could become empire, how lust could topple thrones. And centuries later, her story still haunts the marble ruins, a warning carved into history that even the mightiest crowns can be undone not by enemies abroad, but by passions within.